Should the United States ban the death penalty? How many people have seen the ISIS beheadings on TV? Though the death penalty in these cruel murders are completely different, one begins to question whether a civilized society should commit executions. In 2015, 28 people were executed via the death penalty in the United States, according to deathpenaltyinfo.org. So why should college students care about the death penalty? The death penalty is considered arbitrary and discriminatory by some, and the chance of taking an innocent man's life is too much for some to bear. But there are counter-arguments for each of these. Since 1976, 158 blacks have been executed for murdering whites, while only 11 whites have been executed for killing blacks, according to deathpenaltycurriculum.org. As Jesse Jackson, president and CEO of PUSH Coalition, said, "The death penalty has less to do with the violence of a crime and more to do with the color of a criminal or victim's skin." But discretion is a part of the legal system, and each crime is unique. Killing innocent men, and even the possibility of doing so, is unacceptable to some. A University of Columbia study shows that 2/3 of capital trials had errors, and 80% of those sentenced to death did not end up being executed, and 7 were acquitted completely. As Gerald Cogan, former Florida Supreme Court Justice, said, "How many people on death row today may be innocent, but cannot prove it with DNA evidence?" But there is a counterargument. Only when aggravating circumstances outweigh all mitigating circumstances is someone sentenced to death. And the only way to truly prevent them from killing again is to sentence them to death, according to Paul Castle, University of Utah law professor. The death penalty is a great topic to debate. The potential arbitrariness and discriminatoriness of the death penalty and the chance of killing an innocent man are 2 points that bring up a great debate.
400 years ago marked the start of this controversial debate of the death penalty in the United States. Since then, the death penalty has been of constant interest to the American people. Is it constitutionally right to use the death penalty? Is this method truly effective in decreasing criminal activity? These are the questions all Americans should be asking themselves when deciding their stance on the issue. Today, I want to bring to your attention the seriousness of the death penalty and convince you that this debate is worth having. Let us first begin by defining what the death penalty is. USLegal.com defines the death penalty or capital punishment as a sentence of execution for murder and some other capital crimes. It was first used in Virginia in 1622 and was permitted in most states during the 20th century for execution of convicted criminals, Marcus 2007. The death penalty originates back to early English common law. However, even though the United Kingdom abandoned the practice nearly 50 years ago, the United States has continued to use it, or at least have it remain on the books. Over the course of the centuries, public opinion on the death penalty has undergone vast changes. The first major case addressing and establishing a precedent for the death penalty was Furman v. Georgia in 1972, in which the Supreme Court declared the death penalty as violating the 8th and 14th Amendments. Other by Gonzaga, 2012. As of 2006, the state of California has not applied the death penalty, although it still remains on the books, Holt, 2015. It is important for all Americans to have a deep understanding of what the death penalty is, as well as its limitations. Now that you understand what the death penalty is, let's examine how it relates to the Constitution, what influence it has on the United States economy, and how effective it is in reducing levels of crime. Attorneys and judges have long used the English and 14th Amendment to refute and acknowledge the constitutionality of the death penalty. Now let's shift our focus to the impact the death penalty has on the United States economy. According to a Florida study, the state spends 6 times as much money on a single capital case as it would if it were to imprison a defendant for life. The last major concept I want to leave you with today is how effective the death penalty actually is in reducing levels of crime. Does the usage of the death penalty actually reduce crime? According to Lam Purdy, a professor at Dartmouth College, murder has been more common in states with capital punishment than in states without capital punishment. If the U.S. is to lead as an example of the nation, Shouldn't it have a clear stance on the issue? It all starts with you. Get educated.
Freddie Lee Pitts, a man who was exonerated from death row in Florida, once said, "You can release a man from prison, but you can't release him from the grave." It is true that we have no way of judging how many innocent human beings have been executed due to the death penalty, but we can be certain there were some. But then we must consider the people who are truly innately evil and the family of victims who seek closure and restitution. Our late President, Ronald Reagan, advocated for capital punishment. We must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawbreaker. When considering the stakeholders in the debate regarding the death penalty, one must first consider the direct stakeholders, such as lawyers and defendants, and then the indirect stakeholders, such as taxpayers, religious officials, and families of victims. As long as the death penalty is in place, lawyers stand to make much more money. The defense of capital cases often requires more expertise, commitment, and resources rather than other appointments. The death penalty litigation has become a specialized field of practice, and without the death penalty, many lawyers would lose their jobs. Defendants facing capital punishment are probably the most significant stakeholders regarding the death penalty. Many observers from a wide variety of perspectives and cases from different states have found the same scandalous quality of legal representation. These assessments are supported by numerous cases in which the poor were defended by lawyers who lacked even the most rudimentary knowledge, resources, and capabilities needed for the defense of a capital case. Racial discrimination in capital sentencing is also needed to be critically evaluated when discussing the death penalty. Because blacks in the United States are disproportionately members of the lower class discrimination would affect them more heavily than white people. Now let's examine the indirect stakeholders regarding the death penalty. Taxpayers, religious officials, and families of victims are just a few groups that are affected by the death penalty. Capital trials create a crushing financial burden for many countries because countries bear a disproportionate share of the costs. Compared to first-degree murder cases in which the death penalty is not sought, the extra cost of adjudicating a capital case through the execution is about $2.16 million. Some argue that the death penalty gives the family of victims closure and justice. Many religious officials are extremely against the death penalty and accuse lawmakers of trying to play God. In short, the death penalty involves a multitude of stakeholders when it comes to advocating for it or against it. It affects the specialized group of lawyers trained to deal with capital cases as well as the everyday taxpayer. It is clear this controversy has divided our nation for many years. The more we examine and consider the consequences and stakeholders of the death penalty, the closer we will finally get to settling on laws that effectively punish criminals to the correct degree.
Cal Poly's SAFER program does a lot for our campus and its victims of sexual assault. Years ago, they placed red handprints around campus to signify where cases of sexual assault had taken place. In an article written by Mustang News, it talks about how after some time, students and parents began feeling uneasy, which prompted their removal. As we can see, the issue surrounding free speech on college campuses affects our own home of San Luis Obispo. We need to be concerned about the consequences of limiting a basic human right and how this directly affects our college experience. According to Professor Kors from the University of Pennsylvania, a university exists to educate students and advance the frontiers of human knowledge, and does so by acting as a marketplace of ideas where ideas compete. The intellectual vitality of a university depends on this competition. According to the peer-reviewed journal, Wither Academic Freedom, despite its historical and maybe even essential roots in the First Amendment, contemporary case law has consistently shown that professors, unlike most members of society, have no rights to free speech on their respective campuses. As stated in an article written for the Library of the University of Delaware, several reasons are offered in support of banning such expression. Individuals and groups that have been victims of such expression feel an understandable outrage. Being part of a campus which lacks diversity yet is still fairly accepting, this may not seem like the largest worry in the world. However, there are campuses which have extremely diverse populations and have issues with people coming on campus to advocate for controversial topics. To conclude, the idea of significantly regulating freedom of speech is a change that we would see in our own lives. So which one do we risk? Students feeling uncomfortable in a place that they turn for knowledge and power, or stripping humans of a basic human right?
College campuses across the nation have been abused by free speech. Cal Poly is one of these colleges. As you've seen, there's many examples of speakers using free speech to their own will. Free speech can be used as a tool of hate, spreading beliefs radically, and may even lead to unnecessary violence. But it could promote and useful new ideas on a college campuses. Hate speech has raised concerns in restricting free speech. A cycle of hate speech on college campuses shows a need for a different response. Speculation shows that the actual number of hate speeches are more than what is said. Race and Gender and Class by Harris, V.T., and J.T.C. Religious beliefs are targeted and often radicalized as insulting and to create hatred against the followers of another religion, which is seen across many colleges' campuses by Michiganga J. Policy Review. The U.S. has made it clear that freedom of speech means freedom of religion in laws. Ideas and Trends, Summary of Free Speech by Slade E.H. Colleges are starting to make a move in unbanning free speech in their campuses. University of New York withdraws its ban against communist speakers on their campus. There was no justifying for that action because it violates free speech. A Victory on Free Speech, New York, 1961. Free speech is used as a tool of hate and spreading religious beliefs, and it could be important for the growth of a college campus. The answer could lie anywhere.
Some believe the debate over political correctness on college campuses is a new debate. Granted, recent events have garnered national attention the issue may not have had before, but this is not the first time this debate has been brought up. In the early 90s, at the dawn of the politically correct movement, many big names in American politics gave their 2 cents on the issue. President Bush, according to the academic journal Change, stated the notion of political correctness replaces old prejudice with new ones. Each side holds a vested interest in the outcome of the debate over political correctness and free speech on college campuses, making this a high-stakes argument. Each side to this debate presents arguments that claim to hold the best interest of the student at heart. Those who oppose PC culture argue that without being exposed to dissenting viewpoints, students cannot grow to be rational and critically thinking adults. Those advocating for a more politically correct society argue that there is a difference between exercising your right to free speech and using hate speech and slurs. Perhaps the most prevalent argument for dissenting viewpoints is the idea that political correctness hinders students' abilities to grow. In Diversity for All, Opening Perspectives on Campus, authors DeBard and Eberly state that political correctness provides a limited range of acceptable opinions about a given issue by presuming a moral superiority of correct opinions. The core of all these arguments is that advocates of free speech are walling themselves off from debates with those who may not see eye to eye with them. However, there are many who believe that these advocates are not misguided, fragile students who want to be coddled, but rather students with a vested interest in defending marginalized students. Many advocates argue that the definition of political correctness is being misunderstood. The exponents of political correctness are people hoping to expunge traditional connotations infused with stigma, discrimination, and disparagement. In short, though this debate has been around for decades, the stakes are still high for both parties. The result of this debate could be either significant regulation of free speech or an increase of hate speech and victim blaming across the nation. This debate is even more important now given the current state of our campus. With the slow solidarity movement starting fall quarter and various instances of hate speech versus free speech debates, Cal Poly is right in the middle of this debate. Students are finding themselves on opposite sides of the argument, creating rifts between the student body that weren't originally there. Not only are the stakes high for college campuses in the nation, the stakes are high for our own college campus, our home.